So there's this part of the tech industry that I love. It's an industry that's open to anyone, where you can build yourself a computer out of cheap parts and you can teach yourself to hack before you finish high school. It's an industry where you can drive progress and innovation in our society. But there's this other part of tech that I haven't loved. It's an industry that's also responsible for things like deepening class divisions in our society, and it's not always welcoming to all kinds of people. But what if we could take everything we know as engineers and we could apply it to ourselves? You know, right now we have this divide that it's an all-time high in our industry. You have people over here who are describing discrimination and harassment, and they're outraged about it. And then over here you have all of these engineers with their heads down, just writing code. But what if we could harness all of that energy in a productive way, and we could use it to make this industry better for all of us? You know, when I was growing up, I only knew about the good parts of tech. My dad is an appliance sales and repairman, and someone who grew up working with machines. And when I was 5, he got this Apple IIe, this early Apple computer. And he brought home this big box and he put it down in the middle of our kitchen, and neither one of us had any idea what to do with this thing. But to him, it was just like a dishwasher. I mean, you get the manual, you figure out how it works, and you go from there. And so we moved that Apple IIe all over the country. I lived in 5 different states, and I went to 7 different schools before I turned 18. And every time I moved to a new place, it was like I was parachuting into this place where everyone talked different and I had the wrong clothes. Or I would move from a place where it seemed like no one was dating to a place where it seemed like everyone was. And I remember spending this entire year in middle school learning this game of jump rope that seemed essential to female friendships at my school. I almost had to be an anthropologist studying every detail about this. I realized at some point that everyone was wearing these all-white sneakers, and they had these brightly colored scrunchy socks on, and there were these rhymes, and there was a way that you had to ask to join into the game, and there was no one there to explain it to me. I had to figure that all out on my own. Because the hard truth was that nobody needed me as a friend. I mean, the person who needed friends, it was me. And so all that loneliness, it really forced me to reach out, to connect with all of these people who were different from me, people where it seemed like maybe I didn't have that much in common with them. And in the strangest way, I think this really prepared me for the tech industry, where as a woman, I'm often in these situations where I'm different from the people who are around me. And it hasn't been fair that this has been harder for me, but it also wasn't fair that I had to move to Cherry Hill, New Jersey in the 1st grade. I mean, you end up where you end up, and you try to make the most of it. But all that stretching, I think it's made me almost hyper-aware of the differences between me and other people. I notice all those subtle differences in how we treat people. There's all these things that happen to you, like these little things, and you wonder, did that happen because I'm a woman? Last year, I went to this conference of business leaders, and I introduced myself to someone as the chief technology officer at Redfin. And the person looked at me and they said, "Oh, did you come up on the business side?" And then about 30 minutes later, someone else said the exact same thing. And the thing is, I started coding when I was 5. I have a degree in computer science. I spent my whole life working at high-growth tech companies, and yet people often still assume that I don't have a technical background. And there are plenty of great technology leaders who don't have a technology background, but it's just hard for you to imagine that a lot of male CTOs are really getting this question. And maybe it's no surprise when you Google Chief Technology Officer, these are the pictures that you get. And almost none of them look anything like me. And so this sort of unconscious bias, it's everywhere, and it can be overwhelming. You know that it's happening, but you can't always pinpoint the cause. And so you can say, well, the tech industry, it's broken. What can be done about this? And sadly, we know that a lot of women and people of color and people from underrepresented backgrounds, they leave the tech industry as a result of all of these factors. And so people sometimes ask me, how did you survive for so long in an industry that's so broken? And it isn't just one thing. I mean, I think I've been lucky to mostly work with people who've been very supportive, and maybe because I learned to code so early that I was willing to put up with a lot to stay in this industry. But I also think that part of it is that the approach that I take to something that's broken is to try to fix it. I mean, my dad could get the most broken, janky dishwasher running again if he had the right parts and if he diagnosed the right problem. And even when a refrigerator was lying in pieces, he had this endless faith and optimism that he could get it working again. And so it's made me this diversity mechanic. You know, when I see problems with diversity, what I want to do is get in there and break it into little pieces, replace the parts, and rejoice in that satisfying click when one little piece falls back into place, even if I know that I have more work to do. You know, we have this watershed moment in our industry. It's punctuated by the Me Too movement. We have more people coming forward to tell their stories. You know, what was it like for Susan Fowler at Uber? What was it like for the women entrepreneurs who sought funding from Binary Capital or Dave McClure? More people are telling these stories, but we don't know how to fix these problems. We don't know how to fix them for ourselves. We don't know how to make the cultures of our company better, and we don't know how to fix our industry. But the thing is, this is what engineers do. I mean, other people talk about problems. We get in there and solve problems. We keep working at it. We keep trying one thing after another until the cups and plates come out clean on the other side. And the best engineers know that the way that you solve these problems is you mix and match ideas with other people. You get a conversation going, and you work together to solve the problems. And so this is one of the themes of our conference today, is that anyone who gets on stage needs to not, when they talk about a problem, they need to also suggest an idea for fixing it or to ask for help on it, because we can only talk about a broken dishwasher for so long. And I mean, the tech industry, it's our dishwasher, and it's a magical dishwasher that's capable of doing things that, you know, magical things that no dishwasher in the history of dishwashers has ever been able to do. But it's broken. It's really freaking broken. And now we are going to get in there and fix this thing. And so I want to talk to you today about some of the things that I've learned as a diversity mechanic, working on myself, working for our company, and working within the industry. One of the things you learn as a mechanic is that you have to choose the right tools for the job. I can't tell you how many times my dad and I went to the hardware store because we didn't have exactly the right part that we needed to fix something. And this is something that I think about when I'm working with other people too. You know, what tool do I need for this job that I'm doing? When I'm trying to advocate for something, when I'm trying to have a conversation, what is the tool that I need to get this done? And, you know, a lot of engineers like to have these wild debates about whether to use Python or Ruby on Rails based on the purity of this particular programming language. But I've never really had any patience for that. I mean, I think we need to have this essential pragmatism as engineers to choose the right tools and to get the job done. And so when I'm talking to people, I've learned over the years that I need to find the right way to approach the problem. I remember earlier in my career, there was this situation where I had a really heavy workload, and I was in this dreadful meeting. It was going on, and if I'd stepped back and thought about it, I would have realized that my goal was to find a way to gracefully leave this meeting and get back to work. But that's not what I did. Instead, I got out my watch, I looked at it, and I just sort of went, and it felt good for about half a second, and then everyone else in the room realized how disrespectful I'd been, and I had to apologize, and the worst part was then there was no way I was going to be able to leave this meeting. I think in our age of Twitter, we've gotten used to expressing outrage that doesn't really do anything. You know, you feel good for a little bit, you have this echo chamber that gets in there and makes you feel a little bit better, but nothing changes. Sometimes outrage is the right tool for the job, but most often it's really not. And so now I feel like I have these massively parallel calculations going on in my mind whenever I'm talking to someone else. You know, what am I trying to get across here? Do I need to tell a joke to lighten the mood? Do I need to look at someone in the eyes and make sure I'm slowing down my voice and speaking clearly so they understand my intention? And I've also recognized that, at least for me, it's often easier to do things that are calming or that drive towards consensus. And that might be because I'm a woman and society expects women to drive towards social cohesion, but the thing is that confrontation is also really important in business. It's essential because that's how you develop ideas. That's how you figure out the things that you really need to do. And so as women, we need to make sure that we're working with all the tools in the toolbox. So another thing that I've learned has to do with continuous improvement. This is an industry that seems to believe in continuous improvement for some people, but not others. Somehow, if you're a hoodie-wearing college dropout, there's this eternal optimism that you are going to be able to figure things out, that you're going to be able to keep working and get there. And if you're not, the industry can write you off. Somehow people in their 30s and 40s, like Travis Kalanick, are treated as young men who just have some growing up to do. But somehow if you're a 30-year-old graduate of a developer boot camp program, you're almost written off if you can't write production quality code on day one. And that's just wrong. That's not fair. Most things in life can be learned, even things that seem like they're based on talent alone. And I think Silicon Valley has made this effect worse by having this sort of Steve Jobs, you're either born with it or you're not mentality. And this idea that talent is king, it's not just about bootcamp programs. It's something that you can hit in the middle of your careers as well. When I was in my early 30s, I was told that I just wasn't that strategic. I was told that I was a good engineering manager, but I just didn't have that strategic vision that was going to get me to the next level. And this is something that happens to a lot of people. You're told you're good at one thing, but you're not good at the next thing. And no one's really there to help you through that. You kind of hit this glass ceiling. And so to be told that, early in my career, it really stung. But I was unstoppable. I started thinking, let's break this into all the little pieces. What do people mean when they say strategic thinking? And I started figuring it out. I started figuring out all the components that went into it. And I figured out how to be strategic. And then I started coaching others on this, and we turned it into a program at Redfin. We've done some writing and speaking about it to help other people develop their careers. And actually, a lot of those people are also from underrepresented backgrounds. So just this mindset change about what can and can't be learned, it's unlocked the careers of so many people. But I also think it's important that we stand up and we ask for help when we're working on a skill. We can spend as much money as we want at companies on mentorship programs and career development and all the rest, but it's the people who are intentional about what they want to work on, the people who tell the others around them what they're working on, those are the ones who really go the fastest. And this doesn't stop when you get to the C-suite. A couple of years ago, I decided that I wanted to work on public speaking, and so I got a public speaking coach, and I looked for more opportunities to be up on stage. And then more recently, I started thinking about being on a board, which is something that's still a work in progress for me. The thing is that we need to ask for help, and we need to, as leaders, be there to help people when they ask. And so at some point, as I progressed in my career and I was taking on more responsibilities, I sat back and I realized, oh, well, I'm a manager now, and if there's a problem here, I'm actually the one who's supposed to fix it. And so I started taking this diversity mechanic approach towards my whole company, towards the teams that I was managing. And one thing you learn as a mechanic is that if one thing doesn't work, you have to try something else. In the early days of computer programming, we used to teach machines to do basically the same thing over and over. They were very simple algorithms that they would run. But then more recently, there's been this machine learning revolution where now our algorithms, they learn as they go, they adapt, they figure things out on the way. And this is what we need to do in our industry when we're working on diversity. Many of our diversity initiatives right now are running the exact same subroutine as well. So we do things like we give unconscious bias training, or we hire a couple of people from a dev boot camp, and then we declare ourselves done. But if we just start judging companies, whether it's Google or Facebook, and yes, Redfin, by the results and not just by the effort, we can clearly see that there's so much more that we need to do. As Emily Chang said earlier, when I joined Redfin, I was the only woman on our Seattle engineering team. But today, I'm proud to say that 32% of our technology team are women. And it makes it one of the most gender diverse technology teams in the industry, so thank you. And more than 50% of Redfin as a whole are also women. But racial diversity is a different story for us. So we've tried some of the usual things, and so far we've only seen the numbers go up just a little bit. And to some people, that's like the sound of failure. It's like the sound of a dishwasher just starting to come up to life, but then sputter out again. But to an engineer, that's the sign that we might have a few things that are just barely starting to work. It's a sign that we need to keep investing in it. We need to find out what the next thing is that we need to do. And, some people have asked me, do you think that Redfin's efforts on racial and ethnic diversity are going to be harder than the ones on gender diversity? And I would say, so far, it's maybe too soon for me to tell, but I think it is going to be harder. And I think one of the reasons it's going to be harder for me personally is that I'm not going to be able to draw on my experiences as a person of color in tech, because that isn't the experience that I've had. And so I'm going to have to do more to reach out, to learn from others, to ask for help, and try to do everything that I can as an ally to make Redfin a great place for all of those folks. But I can tell you about what we have been doing on racial diversity so far. So, first we started going to code academies that focus on underrepresented minorities, but we found out that there were almost more competitive companies there than candidates. And so then we started expanding our efforts to large land-grant colleges that are known for having underrepresented student populations. We overhauled our career development program. We now have managers check in twice a year with a formal career development plan to make sure that there are opportunities for people to advance, including people from underrepresented backgrounds. We measure our promotions at every cycle to make sure that as we promote people and as we hire, we're moving in the right direction. And even just getting out there and talking about our efforts on diversity, that's caused some changes for us too. We're getting more people who are applying for jobs at Redfin who say, one of the reasons I'm here interviewing is because I've heard what you're doing about diversity and I want to be a part of that. And the point is, you can't just try one thing and then stop. You've got to keep working. You've got to keep generating more ideas. And so this is an approach that we've taken with diversity. It's to basically make a list of all of the bugs that we have in our culture, all of the things that we want to do to improve inclusion at our company. And we use the exact same tools that we use for tracking bugs in our software. So this is just a bug tracking backlog, essentially. And anyone in our team can put ideas onto the list. And so right now we have about 20 engineers who are working on all kinds of different diversity initiatives. We've worked on things like inclusive language in job postings, or figuring out the percentage of rewards and recognitions that are going to people from different underrepresented categories. And the surprising thing here is that just by making this public list, it democratized the process. It brought all these people who are passive about diversity into the fold, and it made it possible for anyone to participate in these efforts. So it's really helped us to expand the amount we've been able to do to drive diversity. But we all know that an important part of driving diversity is building an inclusive culture too. And one of the things we've had to do there is think about how people interact. There's this core agile development concept called the user story, which says that before you start building software, you have to understand the user story. You have to understand where they're coming from and what their problems are that you're trying to solve. And this happens too when you have teams of people working together. People need to figure out each other's user stories too. And the importance of this is, there's this universal problem of how we relate to each other. It has to do with how men adapt to women, how women adapt to men, how 49ers fans adapt to Seahawk fans. It's something that requires training and a lot of work. And so at Redfin, we almost feel like we're building a service-oriented architecture between people where everyone has their own API and everyone logs errors in different ways, and we're trying to get all of these people to work together. So some of the things that we train people on are, when you disagree, assume that the other person has the best of intentions. We ask junior people to speak first so that they're not going up against a more senior person. We ask people to restate each other's arguments, even going so far as to write it down to make sure that you really understand where that other person is coming from. And then an important one is we ask people to have their disagreements either in person or over a video chat instead of just typing away on Slack, which isn't a great way to figure something out. The point is that if you want to have an inclusive culture, it's not enough to just say, let's have everybody be nice to each other. It's something that you actually have to train on. You have to support people as you try to build an inclusive culture. And then there's this idea of embracing the minimum viable product. In the early days of tech, we used to build these perfect, beautiful products and ship them all at once. But what really unlocked innovation in our industry is when we started embracing the imperfect and the unfinished, when we started getting a version out there and getting feedback and then iterating rapidly to find the right solution. And this is something that applies to people too. You know, somehow our industry thinks that the minimum viable product for an engineer is someone with a 4-year degree from Stanford. But you know, that's just not right. We should be able to invest in anyone who wants to get into this industry. We should treat anyone interested in tech as a minimum viable product. When I first started working at Redfin, we didn't hire anyone from dev bootcamp programs. And our managers, myself included, were really nervous about what it would be like to bring on people with less formal computer science training. We thought, you know, oh my gosh, we're going to have to spend all this time with them, and how are they going to ever get to a point where they can write production quality code? But around that time, we were hiring on all these interns, and we decided to build a training program for them. So we built these online modules where there were office hours, and you could get help, and it was on mobile and security and all these different topics. And the interns loved it, the managers loved it, but then we took this step back, and we realized that we had actually built that missing training program. That was what we needed to bridge the gap between someone with less formal computer science training and what we needed to be a software engineer at Redfin. And so it helped us to take that leap. Today, we've hired a bunch of engineers from dev boot camps or people who've taught themselves how to code on Coursera, and they're doing amazing work. They're making meaningful contributions to our code base, and they're helping us to build a more welcoming environment at Redfin, too. And so why does all of this matter? I mean, diversity sounds nice, but how does it affect the bottom line of a company? Do you need to be diverse to win? And this has been a hard case to make. I mean, it seems like many of the most admired and successful companies in tech, they seem to have succeeded despite an apparent lack of diversity. And it's also hard to tell whether diversity is having an impact on your company because diversity changes slowly over time. So because diversity is changing slowly, you can't always make this clear case of a before and an after. But that's another thing that's interesting about Redfin is that we have seen diversity in action at our company because in just a couple of years, we really dramatically changed the gender makeup of our technology team. And so we've started looking at, you know, what was the before and after like? What are the ways that this team created competitive advantage for our company? And we feel that there are some projects where these teams generated millions of dollars more in revenue than we previously would have been able to do. And so I want to walk through one of those case studies with you today. And the case study is on a feature called tour automation. So for years, we've been working on a vision that we have to automate the process of scheduling a home tour. So when one of our home buyers comes to our site and they click on a button, we want to be able to set up all of the things about that tour. And it's a really complicated process. You have to make sure that there's an agent available to take the customer to the house. If someone lives in the house, you have to make sure that they can clear out on a Saturday when you're ready to go on that tour. And then often a customer wants to see more than one house, so you're optimizing the drive times between all of these different places. And so it just got complicated really, really fast. It was far more complicated than I'd ever expected that it was going to be. But the engineers, we took this approach that we normally take. We defined the process, we built the software, we built the process, we built the software. We kept trying to roll this thing out. But we hit this wall. We got to about 30% adoption of the feature, and we just couldn't get past that wall. We couldn't figure out why our real estate agents were saying they didn't like the feature and they didn't want to use it. But around that time, the team, we were hiring new people into the team, and it turned into this gender diverse team that we hadn't had before. And this team just stepped back, and they said, well, what if we just stopped building code and we just started listening? What if we just went out to all of these real estate agents, we built these communications, we tried to figure out what it's like to walk in their shoes? And the magical thing is that when this team got back to work, when they started actually building software again, for the very first time, we were building features that met the nuances of the real estate agents. It actually fulfilled their needs for the first time. And it transformed our business. This was a piece of a much larger project, but it was the piece that we were getting stuck on. And once we were able to break through that, adoption tripled in 1 year. And it exploded the number of people who came to our website and then were subsequently able to go and actually meet a real estate agent in person. And this team added $30 million in revenue over an 18-month period of time. And when we looked back and we said, what changed about this? What was different? What we really believe was different is that this gender diverse team developed the skill of listening. They developed the skill of finding out what the real estate agents really needed. So why was this team better than other teams at doing this? I think it's because diverse teams just have this experience of being the other. There are people on the team who have grown up with that, whether it's women or people of color. You grow up in this world that's maybe not of your own making, and you have to figure out how that world works, and you have to figure out how to adapt to it. And so it's something that people experience, every day when a woman of color or a person of color walks into an office that's mostly male and white. They're having that experience every single day. And this is not something that only people of color or women can have. It's not an experience that is their exclusive domain. Anyone can have the experience of being the other, and they can be open to connecting with other people. But these interactions, they're just more likely on a team that's diverse. And so what I think we saw happen is that this team started really having those experiences and listening to each other, and it was this humbling experience for our engineers. It's that humbling experience that engineers need to have when they go to a customer visit or they go to a field office. They need to try to figure out what's really going on and get into the heads of the people who are there. Because the true job of an engineer, it's not to calculate prime numbers. The true job of an engineer is to solve real-world problems. And in order to do that, we have to get out of our own heads. And so, it just makes me so hopeful for this industry that if we can build more diverse teams, that we're going to be able to get out there and solve real-world problems that are outside of our own direct experience, and that this industry is going to be able to do things that we never dreamed of. But there's one last thought that I want to leave you with, which is that you also have to be able to recognize the things that aren't broken. Maybe because I started coding when I was 5, it was many years before I started getting those messages from society about how tech isn't for girls. And by then, it was just much too late. I was already hooked on this industry. But that doesn't mean that it's been easy along the way. I mean, it wasn't easy to be one of the only girls at the computer state competition when I was in high school. And it wasn't easy to be one of only 2 women on a floor of 150 engineers at my first internship. When I first decided that I wanted to try out being a manager, people told me, well, you're good at coding. Maybe you ought to stick with that. But that might have just been a way of saying, well, you don't really fit the mold for what we think of as an engineering manager. And then when I decided to have kids, well, I got lots of opinions on that too. There were people who said, well, you really ought to just leave tech. It doesn't go well with motherhood. And then other people said, well, you can have a kid, but just don't take a very long break because tech's moving so fast, you're never going to be able to jump back into that. And when I decided that what I was going to do was work from home for a couple of years so I could be near my kids when they were small, well, people gave me a lot of opinions on that too. But the thing is, I didn't want to have to choose between being a mom and being a software developer. I wanted to be able to do both well. And ultimately, I realized that it's not broken to want to be a software developer and a happy-go-lucky young woman and a loving mama of 2 boys, someone who still likes to go out dancing, and a C-suite executive all at once. I mean, what's broken is that this is unusual at all. We have to make room for women to be fun-loving and goofy and feminine and imperfect, to be wives and sisters and mothers and friends. And we have to do that by first making that room inside just one woman, inside ourselves. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to transition into some Q&A. So if you have a question, I'll help facilitate that. We have one right here. Have a seat, Bridget.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kajun. I'm a user experience designer. This is professional hazard, so I have to ask. When that conversion doubled for the tour, if you could disclose, what was the secret?
What was the secret to the conversion doubling? The secret was that we understood all of the complicated local nuances that we needed to achieve a home tour across all of the markets across the country. It wasn't really as much about what software we build or having a giant red button to push. It was really that we hadn't understood the business logic because we didn't understand what it was like to be a real estate agent. We hadn't listened to them, and when they had their suggestions for what we needed to do differently, we thought we as engineers knew better than they did. And so it was stopping and listening to them and having this respectful view of what they wanted that really changed it. And it was a couple of small changes to the process.
Thank you. I think this applies to all the product development.
Yes.
Thanks.
We have a question up front.
Sure.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. My name is Dana. I work in content strategy, but my background's actually in higher education. And what was really interesting for me, I'm from the humanities, so hearing you talk about, the sort of humanistic training of engineers was, I think, a really important point that doesn't always seem to hit home in tech. The value of the humanities, what they bring to tech, and also to the investment industry more broadly. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more your thoughts around how a knack for like global thinking and cultural sort of, relations really does bring engineering and the humanities together in the working profession.
Yeah, I think that I've definitely found that it's much easier to teach someone how to code than to teach them to be a decent human being. And so I think that's one of our experiences with bringing in people from non-traditional backgrounds, so-called, that they're bringing in other ideas and other perspectives, and it's broadening the kinds of products that we want to build. So we've had, Redfin was founded in Seattle, and we've primarily grown in big coastal markets, essentially. But as we've been bringing on a more diverse team, people have started saying, well, what about all the flyover states? What about houses that are at lower price points? How do we make products that are better for everyone? And so I think when you bring in those perspectives, it can have a real impact on your company strategy.
Did we have a question in this section? Okay, if you want to pass the mic. Oh, we'll get you next, don't worry.
Hi there, my name's Lindsay, and an image that Emily Chang put in my head that really resonated was being the only woman in a room of 20 men, and how exhausting that is. And it's something I'm sure a lot of you have found yourself in those situations. And sometimes we're slower to speak. We might have a great idea, but we're hesitant because all the men speak with so much more confidence in what they're saying. What advice do you have for that woman who's exhausted in that room of men?
Yeah, so the exhaustion, I think the first advice is just to take care of yourself, that you can't necessarily be doing all that stretching every single second of every single day. So I think that's the most important thing. I think the other is just to look for allies, to look for people where, maybe you're in a room of all men, but there's someone in there who makes you feel a little more comfortable, a little more confident, and maybe try to draw some energy from the people that are around you. I've generally found that there are allies around, but I don't always see them.
And then we had a question up here.
Hi, I'm Faustine. I'm a marketing manager at FeedZai, and I had a question about ageism. Being a woman in her late 20s, even though I look 24, I've dealt with, not only problems of being a woman in the tech field, but also over and over again dealing with ageism, people doubting you, looking so young. What advice would you have for that?
Yeah, so it's hard to do anything about what other people's biases are, other than, and Emily Chang talked about this a little bit too, is just to try to go in and do your best work and prove folks wrong and hope that will change some of those perspectives. But I think that just, for me, when I became a manager pretty early in my career, and that was when I experienced some of those things about, was I too young to be a manager? And it's just to kind of keep at it, to keep going through it, to tell yourself that you're there for a reason, to not have the imposter syndrome that might go along with being younger, and make sure that you're doing your best work despite what other people might be thinking.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have one question in the middle. Right there in the middle.
Hi, my name's Nikita. I'm a software engineer. Your last statement hit home about motherhood, since I newly discovered that I'm on the same path of motherhood.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Congratulations.
I guess I've started having those same apprehensions. Do I tell my manager? Or if I go away, will I be still well respected? Because I'm at a good place, but going away, all of that stuff. Can you talk about your experiences, advice? How do I take care of it?
Yeah, so I've taken an approach of trying to be as direct as I can with my manager about what it is that I need and how I think things will need to look. And so that's actually one of the reasons that I joined Redfin, is that Glenn Kelman, who's our CEO, and we've known each other for quite a while. And when I was thinking about joining, I said to him, I want to protect these evening hours so that I can be with my kids. I work extremely hard, but this is really important to me. And we had that dialogue about what was going to work for Redfin, what was going to work for me. And my being open about it and asking for that meant that I wasn't having to hide anything or sneak out early or do any of those things. It was all in the open, and it was something that we'd had a dialogue about. And so now at Redfin, we ask our managers when someone on their team is going out on a parental leave to have an open conversation with them and say, it's not really about the time when you're going to be on leave that we have to worry about. It's really the time when you get back. That's when things are changing all the time and people don't know what to expect. That's the long road that you'll be on. And having a good relationship with your manager through all of that is really important.
We have one over here.
One in the front.
Hi, my name is Varsha, and I had kind of like a question. So when I started working like an internship a couple years ago, it was at like this big tech company. I was really excited. It was my first big company, and I was like all ready to go in. I had my first day outfit, and I walk in and meet my team, and I suddenly felt like a little bit out of place because I was dressed up, like just not like over the top, but just business professional. And then I dressed like that for 2 days and then decided to kind of tone it down after the third day and felt like people were listening to me more and taking me more seriously when I was suddenly wearing like t-shirt and jeans or just looking very like I didn't put that much effort into my appearance. So it was like something that I was like, okay, I know how I want to come to work looking, but I also want to be taken seriously, and I'm just an intern, so I'm not going to try to like stand everyone up. But I mean, I don't know, kind of like, what's your advice for someone in that situation? Like, do you constantly just have to tone yourself down to be taken seriously? Like, and how do you make other women feel comfortable in that position?
Yeah, so I know that even in my own career, I've made different choices on that at different points in my life. I think earlier on, I did tend to dress down a little bit more and try to fit in, especially in situations like that internship where I was one of only 2 women on a floor of 150 men. I think I did try to pull more towards that. And looking back, I wonder if I needed to do that or not. I wonder if I could have just been myself more. And as I've gotten later in my career, I think I've had more of the confidence to dress and to show up the way that I want to. I think that any company would say they want you to be able to be your full self at work, and they want you to be able to come in wearing and feeling the way that you want to be. But I also know it's a complicated choice, and some people go the other direction too, and that's okay.
We have time for 2 more questions, I think. We had one over here.
Hi, I'm Ashma. I am in product in Intel. First of all, thank you, Bridget, for being the role model for women who want to go and pursue, aggressive stuff without sacrificing their other personal priorities. Really appreciate that. So you mentioned in your talk that when you were trying to break into the strategy side, that you had people doubting you and trying to second guess where your interest and strengths lie. Can you tell us a little more about what things you did to convince them, and how do you approach something like this? Is that something you've seen repeatedly? Is that something women face more, and how do we strategically tackle that?
Yeah, I do think that it is something that women and men and people of color, that a lot of people experience the folks around them saying, you're not good at this one thing, but then not offer you a next step. And so I think that research suggests that it does happen more for women and for underrepresented people, because when they look at you, they don't necessarily see you as a leader because, like when I showed that slide of all the chief technology officers, they don't look like you. And so I think people have to do some mental mapping to give you make it possible for you to be in that space, but it's not all up to them. I think what I've tried to do is find people who see the potential in me. So people talk about getting mentors or just having friends who will speak directly to you about what it is you need to work on. And that's what's worked for me, is finding the people that I trust to tell me how it really is and tell me what I really need to work on. And that's what's pushed me forward in my career.
One last question. Anyone? We have one on the left side there.
Hi, I'm Emily.
Hi, Emily. I know you.
No, Bridget. I'm just wondering, we've been talking about stereotypes and kind of what makes a good engineer and how we know that those things aren't true. And we've talked a lot about like the physical differences that we see in leaders, like when we Google CTO. I was wondering if you think there are similar stereotypes in kind of like the personalities that define good leadership. From your experience as an executive, do you see those things as like a set of skills that people need to learn, or is there also room for kind of more diversity in leadership and communication style?
Yeah, so I do think that there's more room for having more personality types in leadership. I think that there's been a lot written about this idea that extroverts tend to be told they should be managers and introverts tend to be told that they shouldn't pursue that. So that's one example. I do think that at Redfin we have many examples of people who are more on the introverted side who've become extremely strong leaders. But sometimes it has taken a little bit more pushing maybe to get them to see themselves that way, and that could be because of societal pressure against viewing them that way. So I do think that there's opportunity to get more people into leadership. I don't think leadership is connected necessarily to a checklist of personality traits. I think it's about caring about the people on your team, wanting to develop them, and you can have a lot of different leadership styles that work for that.
Well, thank you, Bridget, so much for your keynote speech today and answering all these questions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.